Shabbat Shalom. Our Torah portion starts with, these are the laws you are to set before them. After the 10 Commandments are given, there is a long list of laws and orders related to the course of life, such as a person's property, responsibility for this property, laws of loss, and the relationship between the citizen and the government. This Shabbat, I want to talk a bit about the contrast between the exciting and the mundane, between the extraordinary and the ordinary. Then I want to talk a little about mercy, fair trial, and justice. Many commentators tend to see Parashat Yitro and Parashat Mishpatim as complementary, one following after the other. I would like to suggest otherwise, that there is a contrast between these two Torah portions as opposed to a connection. These parashot present two different mental and spiritual states. The portion in which the Torah is given is a one-time revelation, whereas Parashat Mishpatim is about the daily requirements of human society. Let's explain the difference between exciting and ordinary. Last week, we read the portion of Yitro, the portion of the 10 Commandments. When we read the 10 Commandments, it is customary in Israel to stand. And in our congregation, we stood out of honor for this event. In last week's Torah portion, God Himself came down from heaven in order to give us, to all of humanity, the tablets of the law. Last week's parasha was a climax, God's one-time revelation to the people. The excitement was tremendous. The whole nation saw it. There was awe and fear, real fear in the hearts of people. There was a full pyrotechnics display, smoke, fire, voices, noises, rumbling, and it was an emotional high. The giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, is a foundational event for the Jewish people throughout the ages. But immediately afterwards comes the great fall of the golden calf. There are more stories that are great, exciting, and tremendous events followed by a fall. For example, in the story of the creation of the world, we read about the creation of nature, the animals, the garden. Everything is new. Everything is fresh. Everything is amazing. But immediately afterwards, we have a great fall and the disgraceful expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The parting of the Red Sea is perhaps the greatest miracle in the Torah. The people of Israel are stuck between the desert and the sea. They see the Egyptian army closing in on them. The people cry to Moses, saying they would have preferred to be slaves in Egypt than to die free in the desert. And in the height of the pressure and the fear, God parts the sea. I imagine this miracle, the parting of the sea, and I get excited. Think about it. As an entire people passing through the middle of the sea with walls of water on each side, an almost unimaginable image. It is a mind-blowing miracle. But what happens immediately after that? The people of Israel immediately quarreled with Moses and God over water. And then about the food. Then about the manna. And then again over the water. As human beings, we need things to be regular, steady. We don't do well with one-time events, especially when they take us to the peak of a spiritual experience. We see that after the peak, then comes the fall. And the higher we are, the more painful the fall. As believers, we need to find the balance of everyday life. I think that most of us live in some kind of dualism, a spiritual peak at the end of the week in the congregation, when we fervently debate the meaning of a particular verse or theology. Ironically, these debates are usually on theoretical issues, which are not at all relevant to our daily lives. And on the other hand, we live secular, worldly lives during the week. And we are detached from the ideal that we demand of others in our debates over the weekend. We must find the balance to be less spiritual with false standards that are lofty and inaccessible, and to live our daily lives alongside Yeshua and our faith in Him, alongside our families, our neighbors and co-workers, and alongside those we come in contact with on a daily basis. I think that Yeshua was against this natural human behavior, which exists today and existed even during His time. This hypocrisy, which demands much of the others, but secretly allows exceptions when it comes to myself. Because outwardly, we like to look like religious people. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. Here is a place to ask, do we demand much from others? Do we like to look more righteous than we really are? Do our religious debates lead to unity or division? Anger or love? Are most of the issues we debate about relevant for everyday life? Or are they just theoretical? We must strive towards unity. The second issue I want to talk about is justice. Chapter 23 of our parasha opens with instructions for judgment in Israel and the requirement for a fair trial, forbidding bribes, false witnesses, and etc. In the course of proper judgment, we find two very interesting verses, and I would like to examine them. The first one is, and do not show favoritism to the poor person in a lawsuit. And the second verse is, do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. I think there are two ways in which most people relate to the rich and to the poor. Some of the people amongst the officials and the judges take the side of the rich, the strong, the wealthy, and it often annoys us. For example, a large company gets tax breaks on an unimaginable scale, and the ordinary citizen or the small business gets choked by taxes left and right. Or if we go into debt, the banks will acquire all possible interest payments, including repossession, and take everything from us. When a large company goes into debt, banks often intervene and reduce the debt. Again, it is not fair. When a rich person comes into the congregation, we are tempted to say to him, come, sit up front in the place of honor. And to the poor we say, go to the back. Blend in, do not interfere. And on the other hand, the feeling of compassion within most of us wants to feel sorry for the poor, and we automatically take the side of the underdog. This happens many times in the framework of civil or family law, but it also happens in the context of Israel and our Palestinian neighbors. Often Israel is seen as the strong, the ruling, the aggressor, and the Palestinians as the underdog to be supported. The world sees them as the victims. God warns our judges and us not to look with pity on the defendant with the ragged clothes and the holes in his shoes and justify him at the expense of another person. God requires a warm and compassionate heart on the one hand, and on the other hand, He requires of us to take a look at the cold, hard facts And from there, we have to make a decision that is true and just, without being blinded by the wealth, influence, and power of the strong, but on the other hand, not to let our emotions intervene and justify the poor and the helpless if they are guilty. Chazal, the Jewish sages, teach us an interesting principle. He who is compassionate to the cruel will ultimately become cruel to the compassionate. This sentence was first taught on the connection with King Saul. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Saul did not fulfill the commandment, but Saul and the army spared the Hagag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. And later, when Saul suspected that the priests of Nov have cooperated and helped David, Saul killed them, showing no mercy. He also put to the sword Nov, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Saul had compassion on the Amalekites and did not want to kill them as he was commanded. But then he was cruel to the people of Nov and killed them in exactly the same way he was supposed to kill the Amalekites. From here comes the expression. But this expression is deep and important to us and to our daily conduct, even today. The believing community tends to silence problems and scandals of all kinds: assault or sexual harassment, theft or fraud, taking advantage of others, and more. We tend to forgive, to give another chance, not to report to the police, not to publicly humiliate someone, according to the understanding that we are all sinners and we all need a second chance and we all need Yeshua. But here is where this expression comes in. He who is compassionate to the cruel will ultimately become cruel to the compassionate. If we do not complain to the police about sexual assault or allow a person who makes members of the opposite sex uncomfortable, if we let him remain in our community, who are we helping and who are we harming? If we know that there is someone who exploits others in our community and we turn a blind eye, who are we helping and who are we harming? The requirement in this week's parasha is for true justice. Emotion is good and important. Compassion is important. But the requirement of our week's Torah portion, the requirement of God, is to examine the cold, hard facts and to judge truly. We must make sure to keep the good people in the community safe and not to allow them to become victims. Shabbat Shalom.